In the long and remarkable history of United Kingdom, few women have captured the imagination of a nation quite like Amy Johnston. Her name became a symbol of courage, determination, and the refusal to accept society's limits. Long before women were widely accepted in aviation, Amy Johnston dared to imagine herself in the skies, and then proved she belonged there. Amy Johnston was born on the 1st of July 1903, in Kingston upon Hull, Yorkshire, England. She came into the world during a period when British society expected very specific things from women. The early 20th century was not an age that encouraged young girls to dream of adventure, engineering, or dangerous careers. Most women were expected to live quiet lives, focused on home and family. But Amy Johnston was not destined for an ordinary life. She was the eldest of 4 children in a supportive middle-class family. Her father, John William Johnston, was a successful businessman who believed in hard work and discipline. Her mother, Amy Hodge Johnston, was known for her strong character and determination. In many ways, Amy inherited qualities from both of them: ambition from her father, resilience from her mother. As a child, Amy was intelligent, curious, and fiercely independent. Those who knew her often described her as serious and determined. She was not someone who accepted limits easily. Even as a young girl, she wanted more from life than what society expected her to accept. Her education reflected her intelligence. She attended local schools in Hull and quickly showed academic promise. At a time when many girls were not encouraged to pursue higher education, Amy continued her studies and eventually attended the University of Sheffield, where she studied economics. This was already unusual. A woman studying at university in the 1920s was still not common. Amy was quietly breaking barriers before she had ever entered an aeroplane. After graduating, she moved to London to seek work and independence. Like many young graduates, she faced disappointment. Jobs were limited, especially for women. Employers often assumed women were temporary workers who would eventually leave to marry. Amy refused to accept this thinking. She worked as a secretary, but she was restless. Office work paid the bills, yet it did not satisfy her spirit. She wanted challenge. She wanted purpose. Most importantly, she wanted freedom. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the late 1920s, aviation was still new, dangerous, and thrilling. Aircraft were fragile machines made of wood and fabric. Flying was considered highly risky. Pilots were admired almost like explorers. To Amy Johnston, flying represented something much deeper. It represented independence. It represented courage. It represented the chance to build a life on her own terms. At age 25, Amy made a decision that surprised many people around her. She would learn to fly. For a woman in Britain in the 1920s, this was radical. Flying schools were overwhelmingly male environments. Aviation was viewed as a man's profession, technical, dangerous, and physically demanding. Many believed women simply did not belong there. Amy decided to prove them wrong. She enrolled at the London Aeroplane Club and began pilot training. It was not easy. Flying lessons were expensive, and Amy had to save every possible penny. She worked hard to finance her training. She studied aircraft systems carefully, learning not just how to fly but how planes actually worked. This technical interest became one of her greatest strengths. Unlike many pilots of her era, Amy understood engineering. She wanted to know every bolt, every wire, every mechanical detail. Soon she achieved something extraordinary. She became the first woman in Britain to earn a ground engineer's license. This was historic. It meant Amy Johnston was not simply a pilot. She was an engineer, a mechanic, technician, a professional. This achievement alone challenged society's assumptions about women. But Amy was only getting started. By 1929, she had earned her pilot's license. Now she faced a new question. What should she do with this extraordinary new skill? For Amy, flying for pleasure was never enough. She wanted to do something unforgettable. At that time, aviation records were major international news. Pilots attempted long-distance journeys to prove human courage and technological progress. Newspapers celebrated these pioneers. Amy watched these stories carefully. Then she made a bold decision. She would attempt to fly solo from England to Australia. It sounded almost impossible. The journey was more than 11,000 miles. The route would take her across Europe, the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, and finally Australia. There were deserts, mountains, storms, primitive landing strips, mechanical dangers, and almost no modern navigation tools. Many experienced male pilots had failed such journeys. Amy Johnston had only recently qualified. Critics immediately doubted her. Some called her reckless. Others called her naive. Many simply laughed. But Amy had heard doubt before. And she had learned not to fear it. Instead of listening to criticism, she prepared. She studied maps relentlessly. She learned weather patterns. She reviewed aircraft mechanics again and again. Most importantly, she secured an aircraft. It was a de Havilland .60 Gypsy Moth, a small but reliable plane. She named it Jason, after her father's business trademark. That aircraft would become one of the most famous aeroplanes in British history. As the departure date approached in 1930, pressure grew. Reporters began asking questions. Was she ready? Could a woman survive such a dangerous flight? Would she fail publicly? Amy remained calm. That calmness became one of her defining qualities. She rarely spoke dramatically. She did not boast. She simply prepared. On the morning of May 5, 1930, Amy Johnston climbed into Jason and began her historic flight. At that moment, she was not yet a legend. She was simply a determined British woman choosing courage over fear. What happened next would transform her life forever and turn her into a national hero. As Amy Johnston's small aircraft, Jason, disappeared into the skies above United Kingdom on the morning of May 5, 1930, very few people truly believed she would complete the journey. Even among those who supported her, there was uncertainty. This was not an ordinary flight. This was one of the most dangerous solo aviation attempts ever made. Amy's destination was Australia, more than 11,000 miles away, and she would travel alone. No escort aircraft, no advanced radio systems, no GPS, no satellite communication, only a small open cockpit plane, paper maps, basic instruments, and her own courage. The first stages of the journey were demanding but manageable. She crossed the English Channel and entered mainland Europe. Then came the long route across France, Italy, and onward toward the eastern Mediterranean. At each stop, local crowds gathered. News had begun to spread. A young British woman was attempting what many men had failed to achieve. Some came to cheer. Others came simply to witness what they assumed would become a failed attempt. Amy ignored all of it. Her focus never changed. Fly. Land safely. Refuel. Repair if needed. Continue. That was her routine. Day after day. As she moved further east, the conditions became harsher. The weather turned unpredictable. Strong winds pushed the aircraft off course. Dust storms reduced visibility. The heat became exhausting. Inside the open cockpit, Amy was constantly exposed to the elements. Sunburned, wind-beaten, exhausted, but still determined. Then came one of the first major crises. While flying across the Middle East, Amy encountered severe weather and was forced into difficult landings. The aircraft suffered damage. At several points, Jason required emergency repairs. Any serious mechanical failure could have ended the mission immediately. But Amy's engineering knowledge now became invaluable. Because she understood the machine. She could inspect problems herself. She could work with local mechanics. She could make decisions quickly. This saved her journey more than once. As she crossed toward India, fatigue began to build. By now she had been flying for days with little proper sleep. Her hands were blistered. Her face was burned by sun and wind. Her body was exhausted. But mentally she remained sharp. That mental discipline separated Amy from many other pilots. She never allowed fear to control her. She acknowledged danger, then kept moving. In India, crowds began waiting for her at landing fields. Newspapers were now covering her daily progress. She had become international news. Headlines asked, could Amy Johnston really do it? Across Britain, families followed updates in newspapers. Children learned her name. Women admired her bravery. Pilots respected her endurance. A nation was beginning to believe. But the most dangerous stage still lay ahead. From India, Amy headed toward Southeast Asia. The weather became brutal. Heavy rain, violent storms, poor visibility, primitive runways. At one stage, she was forced down in dangerous conditions after losing valuable time. Every delay increased pressure. Fuel had to be carefully calculated. Supplies were limited. One mistake could mean disaster. Then came another serious setback. Jason suffered damage during a difficult landing. Parts of the aircraft needed urgent repair. Many believed this would be the end, but Amy refused to stop. She supervised repairs, checked the aircraft personally, and once Jason was ready, she took off again. That refusal to quit became the defining image of Amy Johnston. Not perfection, persistence. She kept going. Into the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, then onward toward the final stages. At this point, global attention was intense. Radio stations discussed her progress. Newspapers printed maps of her route. Crowds waited in Australia. Would she make it? On May 24, 1930, after 19 exhausting days, Amy Johnston approached Darwin. Her plane was damaged. She was physically exhausted, but she had done it. She landed successfully, and in that moment history changed. Amy Johnston became the first woman to fly solo from Britain to Australia. The world erupted. Australia welcomed her as a hero. Crowds flooded the airfield. Journalists surrounded her. Photographers captured every moment. Back in Britain, celebrations began immediately. The young woman many had doubted was now a national icon. She had not just completed a flight. She had shattered expectations. For women across the world, her victory meant something larger. It proved that courage had no gender. That ambition had no gender. That the sky itself had no gender. When Amy returned home to London, thousands came to greet her. She was treated like royalty. Parades were held. Awards were announced. She received the prestigious CBE from King George V. It was an extraordinary honor. And she was only 26 years old. Yet fame changed her life completely. Suddenly, Amy Johnston was no longer just a pilot. She was a symbol of modern womanhood, a symbol of courage, a symbol of British determination. But fame also brought pressure. The public wanted more records, more flights, more victories. Amy understood that expectation, and instead of retreating, she accepted the challenge. She would continue flying. She would continue breaking records. And she would continue proving that her first triumph was only the beginning. After her historic solo flight to Australia in 1930, Amy Johnston was no longer simply a pilot. She had become a legend. Across the United Kingdom, her name inspired a generation. Young girls who had never imagined themselves in technical or adventurous careers now saw a new possibility. Women looked at Amy Johnston and saw proof that barriers could be broken. And men, many of whom had doubted her, were forced to recognize her extraordinary talent. But Amy did not allow fame to define her. She returned to aviation. Because flying was never about celebrity. For Amy, it was about purpose, about pushing limits, about proving what was possible. Soon after her famous Australia journey, she continued setting records. She flew from London to Moscow in record time, then to Tokyo. Each journey reinforced her reputation as one of the finest aviators of her era. These flights were not easy. Aircraft technology was still primitive compared with today. Navigation remained dangerous. Weather forecasts were unreliable. Mechanical failure was always a threat. Yet Amy kept flying, and kept succeeding. In 1932, another important chapter began. Amy married fellow aviator Jim Mollison. Together, they became one of aviation's most famous couples. Newspapers followed their adventures closely. The public loved the story. Two world-famous pilots united by the sky. Together they attempted several long-distance records. Some were successful. Others ended in hardship. One of the most famous came during an attempt to break the transatlantic record. Their aircraft crashed during a difficult landing in Connecticut. Both survived. Again, Amy demonstrated remarkable calm. Even in danger, she remained composed. That was one of her defining qualities. Not fearlessness, but mastery over fear. However, life away from the cockpit became more complicated. Marriage brought pressures. Public attention created strain. Their relationship eventually weakened. And in 1938, Amy and Jim divorced. It was painful, but Amy moved forward. She always did. Then the world changed. In 1939, World War II began. Britain faced one of the darkest periods in its history. The war required everyone to contribute. Amy Johnston did not hesitate. Although she was already famous and could have remained safely away from danger, she volunteered to serve. She joined the Air Transport Auxiliary, often called the ATA. Its mission was vital. ATA pilots transported military aircraft between factories, repair stations, and air bases. This allowed combat pilots to focus on battle. It was dangerous work. Many people underestimated it. But it involved flying unfamiliar aircraft, often alone, often in poor weather, often without radios. Amy accepted the challenge immediately. She flew many different aircraft types: bombers, fighters, training planes. Every day required technical skill and courage. Once again, she proved herself. Not as a celebrity, but as a professional, a servant of her country. Then came the day that changed everything. January 5, 1941. A cold winter day over the skies of Britain. Amy was flying an airspeed Oxford aircraft. Her mission seemed routine, but conditions were poor. The weather was difficult. Visibility was low. Somewhere over the Thames estuary, something went wrong. The exact details remain uncertain even today. Navigation error, fuel problem, weather disorientation, mechanical issue. No one knows for certain. What is known is this: Amy's aircraft went down near the River Thames. Witnesses later reported seeing a woman in the water. A rescue attempt began immediately. Royal Navy officer Walter Fletcher entered the freezing water trying to save her. But conditions were brutal. The water was deadly cold. Amy Johnston disappeared beneath the surface. She was only 37 years old. Britain was stunned. A national hero was gone. Her death felt deeply personal to the public. For over a decade, Amy Johnston had represented courage and hope. Now, in the middle of war, Britain had lost one of its brightest stars. Tributes poured in. Newspapers mourned her. Pilots honored her. Women across the country remembered what she had made possible. She had changed more than aviation. She had changed expectations. Before Amy Johnston, many believed certain careers were simply not for women. After Amy Johnston, that belief became harder to defend. Her legacy survived. Schools were named after her. Streets carried her name. Statues were built in her honor. In her hometown of Kingston upon Hull, she remains one of the city's greatest heroes. Museums preserve her story. Aviation historians continue studying her achievements. And modern female pilots often name her as an inspiration. But perhaps Amy Johnston's greatest legacy is not found in monuments. It lives in every person who chooses courage over doubt. Every person who hears others say, "You cannot," and decides to try anyway. That was Amy Johnston. Not simply a pilot. Not simply a celebrity. A pioneer. A trailblazer. A woman who looked at the sky and refused to believe it belonged only to men. Her life was not long, but it was extraordinary. And even now, nearly a century later, her story still reminds us. Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep moving despite it. The end. If Amy Johnston's incredible story inspired you, subscribe for more real history documentaries, share this video with others, and tell us in the comments. Which brave woman from history should we cover next?